everybody. Welcome to the PVD Horror Podcast. This is Dave, and I am joined with a super special guest that I'm very, very, very excited to have here. I am joined here with William Brent Bell, who you might recognize the name from being the director of The Boy, The Orphan First Kill, Deliver Us, and a few others. But today we are here to talk about this brand new film that's coming out called Lord of Misrule. Which will be releasing in theaters and on demand on December 8th of 2023. So, Brent, thank you so much for joining us. If you like all things horror and want to get the best horror news, interviews, and reviews,
like, subscribe, and ring that bell to follow us and satisfy all your horror needs.
Thank you for having me.
I was a huge fan of this film. So I just have to say that right off the bat. But before I get into that, I do want to ask you a little bit about, yourself and your career. So I guess I'll ask the generic question that everybody asks. What got you into filmmaking?
My parents got me into watching movies prior to the divorce, and that was kind of my babysitter. But I got kicked out of high school, and it took about 2 years for them to figure out that I hadn't been going, and I was making movies, which is such a cliche sort of, but I guess it's why a lot of us become filmmakers.
Sure.
And then so many times in as a kid, it's just anything that would happen that would be interesting or funny or whatever, it would just be like, that's going in the movie. And I didn't even know what that meant.
Yes.
But now I look back and I'm like, oh, right. And a lot of those things haven't made it into any movies, but it's one of those things, where it's like, I always thought I wanted to do it, but I never really thought it was possible.
Sure.
And even when I came out to LA, it was, just, I didn't know anybody or anything. So, just an urge.
I have a similar thing where me and my friends, anytime something hilarious would happen, we're like, oh, that's going in the movie. And
Really?
No idea what that movie was. I swear to God, there was this, we always had this thought about a person's walking down a sidewalk and their hands are in their pockets and they trip and they fall, but their hands are stuck in their pockets and they can't get them out. And then they fall on their face, and we're like, that's in the movie. I have no idea what movie this is. I hope it gets made one day. So we'll see.
And then they get hit by a car. And I always
exactly.
have a weird thought like that, like, really, somebody getting smacked that way. I saw somebody get run over by a car kind of like that, but it wasn't horrible. But wasn't like in the movies.
No, I imagine it's not. How old were you when you did your first actual film project?
Well, do you mean like a room movie or
Sure.
Oh God, I think I was 25.
Okay.
When I did my first feature.
Yeah.
And it was, we shot it in Vegas, and it was a big cast. Never finished the movie really. But it's what got me signed. And then it just never got finished. That was my first movie. And it was kind of a little bit more, it wasn't a horror movie. It was kind of like a Sundancey movie, like an indie coming of age kind of film. Okay. And I made it because the guy, it was $25,000, and my friend who was like helping pay for that movie sold motorhomes in Vegas. And I was like, okay, I want to make a movie. And we didn't have an idea. And he was like, I've got all these crazy stories. And he was putting up most of the money. So we made a movie about that. And then I was like, okay, I know I want to make the movie I want to see, and which led to everything else.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask you a little bit, what's your connection to horror? Like, what are you a horror fan? Do you have some favorite films of your own? And, why do you choose to make films within the genre?
I was always a horror fan, and like I said, being a product of divorce, both my parents, who are young parents, they showed me, they allowed me to see a lot of scary stuff that I shouldn't have seen as young as I was. And then my sister was kind of my main babysitter. She was like 5 years older, so she was at a good age to be introduced to horror, but then I was tagging along. And that's the thing about horror, is it kind of, usually scars you a little bit. A couple movies when you were a kid, kind of, you can't get out of your head.
Oh yeah.
And for me, it was things like Halloween and Trilogy of Terror, and I always loved The Omen. So many movies, but
Yeah.
those are a few. And then being out here, it was like I was writing. I had a writing partner, Matt Peterman, and we were writing screenplays with like the studios, and those just got put up on a shelf, sort of. And I wanted to make movies. I didn't want to write movies. I wanted to make movies, and so we kind of threw that career away a bit and made Stay Alive, which was the first, or my first like real horror movie, and real movie, and then it's almost like any story you can tell about almost any story in the horror genre.
Yes.
It's such a wide spectrum on so many levels, and the style or the level of horror or however you want to define it can be so different. And now it's just hard for me to imagine any story that doesn't have a horror twist to it. I don't mean literally a twist, but like, yeah, that's a great idea, but I want to bring horror into it, in some way. It just frees up so much storytelling, and the world of horror storytelling is just getting better and better.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So you hit on something that I wanted to ask you about, because I think you're right. Like, there's this ability to tell stories within horror that are really hard to capture sometimes, or become too straightforward in other genres. So much so that maybe they become hard to digest, or it's like, oh, all right, that's a little bit over the top. But in horror, you can like make it subtle, or you can make it a little bit more straightforward. You can really play with these stories, right? I feel like in a way your filmmaking is a lot about telling stories, just in different ways, whether it's through settings, whether it's through family dynamics, um, different things. So I don't know if there's more that you could expand on that, like the way that you tell stories through horror.
Well, I mean, like I said, you can tell any story, and a lot of times I find myself developing ideas, multiple movies sometimes, and I just have an itch to tell a certain type of story, and then it could be in a completely, two very different horror movies, but it's that same kind of through line, because I just want to scratch that itch, I suppose. And then, especially, well, no, it's been this way for a while, but like surprising audiences in ways that, I feel like audiences and horror audiences, maybe even more, the powers that be don't respect audiences quite enough. And audiences are smart, film goers are smart and knowledgeable of storytelling, especially now. I mean, it's just different. When I was a kid, I didn't understand 3-act structure in a movie, but that kind of stuff is much more understood, not understand.
Yeah.
Cut that out. But understood now, and which then allows us as storytellers to play with audience expectations more, because they do have a good sense of what typically is going to happen in a movie. And so I really love finding ways to kind of subvert expectations. And then on the design side of it, it's just such a fun, medium to explore, whether it's creating a video game in a movie or creating a mask or a doll. Like, all those elements to me are just really exciting parts of the process, other than just the straight movie making.
So The Orphan, The Boy, Lord of Misrule, I feel like there's a theme even within those three movies. I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen Deliver Us in ages, so I don't remember the specifics as much as I remember The Orphan, First Kill, and The Boy and Lord of Misrule. But I feel like that is a theme here, and I wonder if it touches on a little bit of something you mentioned earlier, as far as like your own family dynamics. And I feel like the family dynamics are very present and important in those films as well.
Yeah.
in just in different ways. Is that something that's just very fascinating for you to explore? Feels like close to home to you because of your own experiences or something along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like for me, trying to find kind of what's scary usually draws me back to being a kid. And I mean, I had a really weird imagination as a kid. And so, like I said, Trilogy of Terror, the doll sequence in that, Karen Black trilogy of short films,
Yeah.
is something that terrified me. And I thought that, if I sat on like a couch for like 5 years, if I sat on a couch, if I dangled my feet, that doll was underneath the couch and anywhere I was and would cut my feet off at the ankles. And I still had just a really vivid sense memory of feeling that way, which was, ridiculous, but I did. And when I would go to bed at night, and, you're kind of entertaining yourself as a kid, especially like parents divorce, that kind of thing. And I thought every night, if I left my window open, which sometimes you'd have to, that, I'd hide under the covers because I thought a witch would come in through the window, and I thought that my room would become a store essentially, and that this witch is being brought around to buy things from the store. That was my room, toys and stuff. And so if I didn't hide, if she saw me, she would take me. And I've never like applied that to a movie story or anything.
Yeah.
But all that kind of the vibe of toys and dolls and things that make us scared as kids, which strangely even make us more scared as adults sometimes. Just always, was paramount in my imagination. And then to make horror kind of relatable to audiences, which for me is like all I can really do is tell stories that I relate to and hope other people relate to my stories, just like you and I both saying that goes in the movie. That's, I didn't know any other people said that. And but of course, and there's probably a whole, population of people that do. And it takes those personal, it makes those personal stories important to me because then I can find ways that frighten me within those stories, the way that I can relate to growing up. So whether it's a story about a family and they're dealing with divorce or, whatever it may be, it's like, it's all just kind of leaning into what's most personal to me. And then for me, that kind of relatability is then what you can kind of turn on its head and make scariest for audiences.
Absolutely. I love that. Like for me, films are one of two things. Either it's relatable and I can connect to it in some way, or it's so far from what my familiarity would be that it's an experience in itself just to see how others might live. You know what I mean? So I feel that sometimes when I watch foreign films, that's what draws me in so much, is like it's just so different from anything I know that I'm like, oh, I just want to see more. And I get a little bit of both of those from your films, actually. So that's nice.
Well, and I'll say this without it is like, I mean, to me, the relatability of force is so important, and so that you can kind of imagine yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
And in a way, even though the stories do have a certain, sometimes supernatural, something that's not quite real, which is part of the fun of the genre, is you get to take a human story and then make something that is normally legend or mythology real. Yeah. And then get to show like what my take on that would be. And but watching a movie like that, like if it's too fantastical, I find that like if you leave the movie theater or turn off the television, it's like, okay, good, that's over. All right, now I'm moving on with my regular life. But the best horror is the stuff that, the next night in the middle of the night, you go to, the kitchen to get something to eat at 2:00 in the morning. And then when you close the fridge, you think you see something in the reflection of your window. And all of a sudden you realize that movie stuck with you. So it's like that to me, the relatability part, and then grounding even something that's quite fantastical, but trying to ground it to where you could think it could almost happen.
Yeah.
Even like Lord of Misrule is a pretty perfect example of like, to me as a kid from Kentucky, that legend and lore and is pretty normal for the people that live there. But to me, I'm like, this is crazy. This is like these
Yes.
costumes and these masks and this festival, and these festivals happen all around the UK, and it's all just like kid in a candy store stuff for me. And even though it is very real, and even the pagan mythology, and the horrible stuff is based on real stuff that's happened in the past. And the town we shot in, had a thing in the center of the town where they used to burn witches, that's still
Wow.
there. It's like a museum thing that's cordoned off, you can't touch. And that's crazy to me,
Yeah.
so to me that is fantastical and not realistic, or that is, but it's real.
Yeah.
And so that's what's fun with this movie, is it's a pretty um visually, it's like this is a lot of costumes and a lot of weird things going on, but it's all rooted in real stuff.
Yeah.
So
That's perfect. So let me, before I get any further into Lord of Misrule, would you do me a favor? Could you give our listeners a quick synopsis of what the film is about?
sure. um Lord of Misrule is, well, I won't say that. Lord of Misrule is a movie about a town called Barrow, and the new vicar in town named Rebecca lives with her husband and their daughter Grace, and she gets introduced to the town's pagan past. And when they have their harvest festival, their yearly harvest festival, it all seems kind of fun and games, and her daughter gets taken at that festival. She disappears, and then the story becomes about her trying to find her daughter, and the help she gets from the town is becomes something different, and it starts to feel like their pagan history isn't just something they nod to, that it's something they still believe in. And so she's forced to kind of make a decision to try to hopefully save her daughter.
Yeah. So that perfect. Thank you for that. This film is like so incredibly up my alley as far as like the types of films I love. I love I do enjoy when things are not as they seem. So you're around people and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, are these relationships how they're coming off? And you have to like start to question that. I love that like sense of paranoia you can get in a film. But I love films that are, I love folk horror, and ones with lore built into them. And you do all these things in Lord of Misrule, and it's captured so beautifully, but in a dark way. So I feel like all these elements are just going together so perfectly. I'm just curious, like just to start it off, how did you get attached to the film?
My producing partner in the movie, James Tomlinson, um, we were on the lookout for scripts, or they just always are. And he sent me this, and literally said, like, this is good, read it, like,
Yeah.
immediately. And he would normally not say that. I mean, he would be like, read this, but that was like a big deal that he kind of said it that way. And within 5 pages, I already was like in love with it. Um, you know, Leading into the festival, just everything about it, because
Yeah.
it kicks off the tone, and the movie does as well. But the script did. I mean, it kicked off the kind of tone of the splendor and the kind of the dark beauty of it, but also the very haunting, twisted
Mhm.
nature of it as well. And so I was definitely crossing my fingers that the script would live up to the first chunk, and it did.
Yeah.
But that's how I got attached to it. And so then I said, I love this, and we started developing it from there with the writer and producers in the UK.
I think that pagan traditions are they just feel creepy and airy to us because they're on one hand like about celebration, joyousness, a little bit of like gluttony and like self-satisfaction. But then there's a part of them that are typically like have some kind of dark act attached to them, or there's something just so there's like this off-putting like contradiction of them that just make them kind of really interesting topics to delve into like this. And I think that's why folk horror tends to attract such a wide audience, and why it's become so popular these days, is because how it does like kind of touch on like social norms and how society can kind of just learn to accept things that sometimes feel good or give us the result we want, and kind of ignore the things that we don't want to see necessarily that are attached to
Yeah.
them. Are you a fan of folk horror? Did you have influences that you kind of turned to for this film when you were creating it?
I mean, I'm a fan of folk horror, but I pretty much tried to avoid anything. So, I knew of, some things more obvious, some uh I would say the one thing I probably, and it was very early in the process, but I just wanted to make sure that we took a right where Midsommar took a left, because I knew, initially the movie was set in the summer, the script. So I was like, but it was very different than that movie, still the story, but I really wanted to make sure that we, felt different. But otherwise, yeah, it's like I try to just, I'm obviously doing tons of research of folk stuff and pagan stuff, but not movies per se, because I just try to avoid doing that and becoming derivative of something else. You know what I mean? But and it's like that area, the in autumn and those colors, that just to me, I wanted to set it like that anyway, just because I don't know, that's just kind of my favorite time of year, I guess. And I also think it's a very creepy time of year. But no, I tried to avoid, watching anything, and just trust the instincts that have been burned into my head from them. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Certainly are there. But
I'll typically, like, after I watch a film, I'll try to recommend it to a friend by offering them a few films that I feel like it kind of maybe reminded me of it. I struggled with that with this one. I really did. I was like, Midsummer came to mind. I was like, even Wicker Man, maybe in some sense. And then I had this other film, and I don't know why it resembled this. I think more stylistically, The Hollow, I think it was called. It's an Irish film.
I remember that. That was who directed that?
I can't remember for the life of me, but it always was one that stuck out to me
because
there was a lot of lore in it, and it was like these dark nymph fairies, I guess, in the woods or something. It was I don't know, there was something about that I felt like kind of fit into this. But this is definitely a unique film, and I think that you doing the way that you approached it was probably the best way to approach it, so that it can stand on its own. It has elements of different things, but it's not so much so that it's like, oh, that's just another version of this, which it's definitely not a version of anything. I think it's very much a great standalone film. The imagery, you mentioned it earlier, like even just like with the creepy doll in films, and like how you like kind of playing with that. So right off the bat, the mask behind you in the poster, there's something very off-putting about that mask, and I don't even know what it is. As soon as I saw that image, I was like, wow, this is creepy. Where did you come up with the idea of that? And I know you just mentioned research. I want to ask you, what kind of stuff did you research to get the lore surrounding the film?
Well, Tom DeVille, the screenwriter, hatched the mythology, and that was another thing that only partway through the script, the first time I read it, I was like, wow, this is a really fresh mythology, but feels familiar, but it also feels unique, and it feels really complex, but it also feels easy to understand. So those to me are all like really exciting, storytelling tools. And the research that kind of went into the mask, it's like the Lord of Misrule is a real, it's, we have a different take on it, but it's mythology. It's a lore that's been around for thousands of years, actually. And it started off, well, even darker, because it would be one person in town would be king for the week, and he would be like an idiot, like a town idiot, but he gets to be king for a week, but then he's executed after that week. So it's to have, and it's kind of, it was a good thing sort of for him. And so this court jester and that vibe was part of it. And then as far as the mask goes, and Tom wrote it with a hooked nose. And what was really fun, and it's such a talented like crew of artisans in the UK, is once again, when you're making a movie, it's like one of the most exciting parts is when creating something that's going to live on forever. And in this case, being the mask, it was like, let's create something that's different, but not too different, but it still fits the mythology. But and stylistically, I wanted it to be something different. And so we had a concept artist, who it's like, doing a sketch, it's like trying to figure out a police sketch of a mask that I don't know what it looks like yet. And she was incredible. And it was like days and days. And then we'd come back together the next day and she just keep shaping it. And then this idea of it being like a helmet almost, which was not, which was kind of a curveball, and which me was very much inspired by Excalibur from like the 1979 movie. Okay. Mordred, who is, kind of the villain at the end of the movie. He's this young knight in this gold evil armor, and he has this kind of half mask where you could see the bottom half of his face, and it was a helmet. Anyway, I was like, pushing it to be something like that, and something where we could see Ralph's face, but also be hidden behind this kind of sinister mask. And because that's just the fun of it, is going, this can be an iconic, element in the movie.
Yeah. Yes.
Get it right. And it was just so much fun for everybody to look at it that way, and then to try to create something that, and I hoped it would be the poster. And because, to me, it's just something that makes you double take. And it's like, well, that's, beautiful yet unsettling,
yeah.
which is kind of the movie.
Absolutely. Ralph, is it Ineson? Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Actually.
Ineson.
People usually say Innocent, and I say Einstein, but I confirmed that it's Einstein.
Okay, Ralph Ineson. He did such an incredible job with the role that he portrayed. So he portrays a father who has also lost a child, and I guess the best way to kind of describe his character throughout most of the film is he's a little bit like spiteful, like get over it. It is as it was. It's kind of like the ongoing statement. And yeah, he's kind of menacing too. Like he's just got this presence about him. The casting in the film was just great in general, but like I just feel like he really did kind of immerse himself in that role and did such a great job. So how did you feel after seeing all the performances and seeing everything kind of like the way it turned out in the end?
Oh, I've never been in a situation where I've watched a movie I made so many times. I watched it last night. I watch it all the time. I watch it like probably once a week. Just if I'm doing something and I get whatever, I'm like, what? I'm just gonna watch, and I'll just watch the movie. And for me, that's just a strange sign of how like proud I am of the movie. And I think it's partly because I feel like the producers, everybody gave us a lot of leeway to really take some extra time and kind of make the movie that I wanted to make. And which was sonically, visually, casting, everything. And so I feel like I'm not looking at something and going, I really wish this could have turned out differently. I really feel like great about how everything turned out. Casting wise, the cast is incredible, like across the board.
Yeah.
Ralph, the thing that's kind of funny about it, and there's a whole story, but is the part was written for, she was like a 70-year-old woman, and she was kind of a witchy woman. And when we first meet her, she's in this kind of, she takes off, like a sleeping gown and drops it and walks out to her back garden, and very witchy. And I love Ralph, and we're friends, and we work together. And so I wanted him to be involved in the movie, and then had the kind of a crazy idea in the middle of pre-production for him to play Jocelyn. and he loved that idea. And so yeah, he's the kind of guy that comes in and works hand in hand with costume and everybody on, okay, this guy dresses kind of nice, but his wife died, so he doesn't wash his clothes, he doesn't clean under his fingernails. So many detail
oriented, huh? That's
Yeah.
crazy.
And it's it makes it so fun. It just makes it great. And he has to be nude, for a bit, and he was all game for that. It was like I said, 2 years earlier, or even 2 weeks. I mean, we were already in pre-production, so the crew and going, yes, Ralph Ineson's playing Jocelyn, was just a total curveball for everybody. But everybody, of course, the crew supported it, but the producers, they didn't question it. Tom DeVille, the writer, kind of freaked out a bit and was like, I've written this really strong female character. Like, I have to rewrite the whole character, and we're shooting in a month. And I was like, no, don't change anything, like keep it exactly the same. This is just going to be Ralph's interpretation of what's in the script. Which makes Ralph that much more off-putting, because there is more of a female voice behind that character, which I kind of come from the school of thought that people are just people. But if there is more of a female voice, it twisted through his filter, literally his voice and just him, makes for an interesting character.
Yeah. There's also the element, and I don't want to give spoilers, but one of the things that, the rest of the cast are really effective with is there's scenes in here, for example, like the church scene, and there's a scene where the town kind of comes into the home to help her kind of, feel better, I guess, and help her out a little bit. Those scenes in themselves are great scenes, but they're even more creepy after you get to the end and you think back about those scenes, and because like a lot of this movie is just about kind of like that idea, like I said, that paranoia, that like, are things really as they seem? So I love that the way that everybody played these roles, because when I looked back at them, I was like, oh, they were acting like one thing differently than I initially thought. So there's a lot of that kind of like looking back in this film, which I always appreciate when you are done with the film and it makes you think and you kind of reflect on it. That's to me the sign of a really impactful film. And I did that quite a bit after this was done. So
oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of also what you said about things in a story like this, like feeling, I forgot what you said. I thought about it saying something about things feeling seemingly normal when they're not. And and if you look at the characters, I mean, in some ways they're not hiding who they are even.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it is a joyous thing they're doing. And other than maybe one or two lives lost, they're like, this is all very exciting.
Yes. And that's what it is. That really comes through in the end when you kind of get your realizations and you're like, oh, okay. And I mean, that's a good question for us all to kind of like sit back and ponder once in a while. Do we sometimes blindly do this, like in our own lives? Or do we sometimes justify certain things because we're supposed to, or we feel like we're supposed to, or things like that? I love this kind of stuff because it gets me thinking about different ways that this fits into our own society and how we like kind of view things.
I'll tell you one little thing, and it's more of I think Tom DeVille would speak to it better than I do. But very early, when he wrote it, it was the UK was going through Brexit. So this nationalism that was like this extremism that seemed really silly to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it turned out to become a reality, and it really affected their society. It's affected us, but it's a smaller place. It affected them. It's in some very obvious ways that even affected our shooting. But so that kind of vibe of extremism and people will do for not think too hard about it if it makes them happy, and not really think of the implications or it's interesting how it came through.
I have a friend that often talks about the idea of self-deceit, And it's
Yeah.
that way that we kind of lie to ourselves to justify things that make us feel uncomfortable, or that we kind of know like maybe are against our values or more morally wrong. So we lie to ourselves to justify it, and kind of come to some like, well, it's okay because of this. And that's kind of the theme here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I just want to go back a little bit before I lose you here, because I have some questions about some of your previous films that I would be a fool not to ask you, because I like I said, The Boy was, first off, shocked me, and I'll tell you why. Because seeing The Boy, it was so against my expectations of how that film was going to be, and I mean that in the most respectful way, because at the time I think it was maybe the trailer to me didn't hit, or I just, I was like, oh, is this just going to be like another version of Annabelle in some sense? But like watching it, I was like blown away, because I was like, I actually love this movie. It's super enjoyable. Nothing what I expected it was going to be. And I don't think I'm alone on that reaction. Because it really was such a well done film. Um,
Thanks.
just as far, did you get that response a lot? Like, when that came out, was there a lot of like, oh, well, is this just going to be another doll, like haunted doll kind of film? Like, what's going
But it
on
was,
here?
I mean, definitely in creating it and developing it and all that stuff. Kind of like what I said about Midsommar, right?
Yeah.
Was like I wanted to make sure that it was the opposite of Annabelle. And so even creating the doll, which was like a ridiculously intensive thing, I mean, every little detail. It was, the powers that be very, their reaction would be like, oh, the doll has to look scarier, like the way, Annabelle looks scary. Like she's kind of got a scary scowl on her face and
Yeah.
whatever. Um, and I was like, no, we want to do the opposite. We want to do the opposite, more like Damien from The Omen, or, a sweet kid who's holding a knife behind his back.
Yeah.
And if you get close enough, he'll kill you, but you don't see it coming. And so I was always, and so whereas you from the outside looking in, made that quick assumption, I had the same assumption, and so that's what we were fighting against, was making sure it stood out from the movies that it could be compared to.
Yeah.
And then they were great, the producers of that movie, in that the twist in that film, they everybody had to sign NDAs, and the guy in the movie wasn't in the on the call sheet, and it wasn't allowed to be in any press, and we knew that we had to create a trailer that was good enough without that, because we couldn't give that away. And so it was a really weird thing. Once that movie had good legs, in the box office, more or less, and I think it was because people enjoyed the movie, but then people who weren't expecting like the twist, then it started to, but we couldn't talk about that, and the movie's already released. So it was kind of like it was interesting.
You had to rely on word of mouth after people watched the film, essentially. And also kind of knowing that, like, while maybe I would have had a view of it, there's a lot of other people that like, oh, scary doll, I'm there for it. Like, there's that has its own audience itself. People like scary dolls. That's not my cup of tea, but like where that film went was my cup of tea. That twist really did. So yeah, that's interesting. I was always so curious about that. And let me ask you, and this might be already public knowledge, and I'm not sure. Maybe I just didn't hear this. The Boy is like kind of geared on the story of Robert the Doll, correct?
Um,
I don't know why I always thought it was, but I'm not sure.
Not exactly. I mean, I think it was developed with a couple producers and the writer, so it wasn't just like one initial idea. So I think they threw in. I mean, I definitely, when I did research, I researched Robert the Doll.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you for answering that. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you, and mainly because like the Orphan First Kill, I actually watched both Orphan films only a couple months ago for the first time.
Oh, really? That's cool.
So when I heard about this opportunity to talk to you right off the bat, I was like, yes. Those two movies, both of them, again, surprised me. I kind of slept on the first one. People had told me, oh, you should check it out. The second one came out, and again, they were like, no, you really should go back and watch the first one and then check this one out because they're good films. I watch him back to back immediately, and I rarely ever do that these days. I was blown away when this film, doing the sequel, was pitched to you. Like, what was your knowledge of the first film, and what made you say yes to do it?
I was a big fan of the first film, and I had watched it 6 months before they called me about the script and made notes. And sometimes I'll watch a movie and I'll just make notes on my phone, things that
Yeah.
that stand out to me. And I think at the time my girlfriend wanted to stop watching it halfway through because it was too tense. So my notes stopped halfway. And but I'd seen it before. And they said, hey, we want to do a sequel, or I don't remember what they said, to Orphan. I was like, well, I would love to read it as a fan because I'm a huge fan of the first movie. So I would love to read it. I was like, but like that had such a great twist. I just want you to know, like, I'm probably not going to be interested because I don't see how you could ever stand up to the twist. And then I said, I don't know who you're going to cast as Esther, because Isabel Fuhrman was so good. And then I read it. It's one of those things too. And in this day and age, you have the little email chains about everything now, right? And I'm just like, fuck, you guys did it. You got me with this twist, like incredible. All right, let's have a meeting and figure out like how to make the movie. And it just so happened I was having a screening like that Friday night. I'd never met Isabel. Oh no, it was a little bit later. They did an announcement to say I was doing it or something. And then she reached out to me on social media. And I didn't know her. And I was like, I'm having a screening tomorrow night or something. Why don't you come? And she showed up, met her for the first time. And I wasn't expecting, but she was like, I want to play the part. I still want to play her. And she looks pretty much, as much to the same, but just scaled up as anybody could. I certainly look totally different between 12 and 24.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this could totally work. And then it became like a year of, trying to convince the studio to, there was a whole window of time where they absolutely didn't want to. We did, casting of little girls and separately in parallel. And COVID really was helpful because of COVID and just the kind of constrictions of it. It gave us more time to start doing tests. And then we did a photography test, and then we ended up doing a little photo, 1-day camera test, like old school camera test, and built a set and had her. And they were like, oh shit, like this can work, and then they let us do it. And of course, you look back and it's very difficult to, and part of like there was an actress, her name's Violet McGraw, a young actress. I think she's 13 now. She's from Megan. And we'd worked together, and everybody was planning on it being her, if not Isabel. And she was like, the only thing I'm worried about is believably playing a 30-year-old. And I was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. It was always the other way around.
Yeah.
That she's like, are people going to believe me as an adult?
Sure.
And I think that she was right. Like that's would have been the hardest part. So by having Isabel, she can be as devilish and physical, and she could do everything and not hold back, as long as the audience buys it,
Right.
And that they have to buy it like it's perfect. Just are you along for the ride? And luckily that happened.
Yeah. I'm so glad it played out the way it did, because I think her being in that second film was so important to the film. Like obviously she is the role, so it was great to see her kind of carry that on. But it was super effective, super brutal, and also one of those films that just makes you think. Like I know there's a real story out there about a family that adopted a kid, and there's this confusion of whether that foreign child is actually an adult or not. So that kind of like also makes this film feel like even more realistic, the fact that there's this other story out there in real life that is playing with that idea. So
there's several of those stories there. And there's probably a lot more we just don't know about.
Exactly. Absolutely wild. Brent, thank you so much for joining me for this time. This was awesome.
Thank you.
I loved being able to chat with you about these films. I really am a film of your a fan of your film and your work. I can't wait to see what you have coming next after this. Is there anything coming else after this right now that
Yeah,
you know
I mean,
of?
I can't talk about them specifically.
Sure.
I did at one point and it was like, nope, can't do that. But 2024, I think, you know, we're going to go back to the UK and shoot 2 movies, and they're quite different from each other,
Okay.
and they're very different from Lord of Misrule. But I'm excited.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully, if they're in the horror genre, hopefully we'll
Yeah,
see you back here.
definitely.
That'd be great. All right, everybody. Lord of Misrule in theaters and on demand as well. December 8th. So that's right around the corner. You're not going to want to miss this one, especially if you are a fan of pagan rituals and all that good stuff. You want to check this out. It's a lot of fun. So, but thank you again, and everybody have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.